The Oregon air in 1974 hung heavy and damp, smelling of pine needles and secrets. It was the kind of day that made the shadows stretch long and distorted, playing tricks on your eyes. A young girl, no older than 8, wandered through the woods, her small hand clutching a Polaroid camera. She was drawn by something, a voice whispering just at the edge of her hearing, a melody of dread that only she could perceive. It wasn't a friendly voice, not the kind that promised cookies and bedtime stories. This one was cold, like a stone pulled from a deep well. The girl, who would later be known as Lee Harker, paused by an ancient oak, its gnarled branches like skeletal fingers reaching into the sky. There, in the dappled light filtering through the leaves, she saw him. A man, but not just any man. His face was as pale as bone, his eyes dark, almost hollow, and a strange, erratic smile played across his lips. It was a face that seemed to belong more to the night than to the day. She lifted her camera, the click of the shutter a small sound against the whisper of the wind, capturing his image before he vanished into the trees as quickly as he'd appeared. This moment, this photograph, would haunt her for the rest of her days. 20 years later, the echoes of that day still resonated within Lee. She was now an FBI agent, her intuition sharp, sometimes bordering on the uncanny. Some might call it clairvoyance, a gift or a curse, depending on how you looked at it. Her supervisor, William Carter, a man who dealt in facts and hard evidence, assigned her to a series of disturbing cases in Oregon. Murder-suicides, each one more chilling than the last. A father in each family, seemingly normal, had slaughtered his wife and children before turning the gun on himself. The only clue they left behind was a letter, scrawled in a crude, almost childish handwriting. They were all signed Longlegs and contained what looked like satanic code. A horrifying detail was revealed. The handwriting on each letter didn't match anyone in the families. The letters were like whispers from the grave, carrying a palpable sense of dread. Lee was different. She wasn't just seeing the facts, she was feeling them, sensing the lingering darkness, the subtle vibrations that seemed to cling to the crime scenes. It was as if the victims were still there, reaching out from the void, trying to tell her what happened. She noticed a pattern. Each family had a 9-year-old daughter born on the 14th of the month, and the murders all occurred within 6 days before or after said birthday. It was a horrifying puzzle, a dark and twisted game being played out in the quiet suburbs of Oregon. Lee's investigation led her to a chilling discovery. The dates of the murders formed an occult triangle on a calendar. The sense of unease was building inside her. Something terrible was about to happen. The mystery deepened when Lee spoke to her mother, Ruth, a quiet woman who seemed to carry her own silent burdens. While they talked, a coded birthday card arrived for Lee. It was marked with the same handwriting of Longlegs. Inside was a chilling warning, threatening her mother's life if she ever revealed the source of the code, a message designed to bind her in fear and silence. It was a clear message that whatever Longlegs was, it was connected to her past, and that they were in her life. This wasn't just some random killer. This was something personal, something that had reached across the years to pull her into its terrible web. It was a deliberate act, a calculated move to ensure her involvement, to force her to play the role it had designed for her. A crucial clue turned up, a child's doll, which had a metal orb inside, pulsing with a strange energy. It was another breadcrumb in the trail, a glimpse into the twisted logic of the killer. Lee and William found their way to a mental hospital to question Carrie Ann Camera, a survivor of Longlegs' attacks, the only one who had survived. They were looking for answers, a way to understand the madness that had consumed those families. What they found, however, was more disturbing than expected. They learned that someone, using Lee's name, had already visited Carrie. This was not just about the murders themselves. It was about control and manipulation, and the unnerving sense that someone was always one step ahead of them. The chilling revelation that someone had used her name to get to the survivor made the situation even more personal and terrifying for Lee. It was like a mirror image, a dark reflection of her, being used for evil. William was beginning to suspect a connection between Lee and Longlegs. He started seeing Lee differently. She wasn't just his agent, she was something else, something potentially dangerous. He dug into her past, unearthing a police report from the day before her 9th birthday, filed by her mother, about an intruder. The pieces were starting to fall into place, each one more disturbing than the last. William urged Lee to speak to her mother about the incident. The situation was growing more complex, and the lines between the hunter and the hunted were beginning to blur. Ruth directed Lee to her childhood belongings, her past like a hidden vault of secrets. Deep in the box, among old toys and forgotten memories, she found a photograph. It was the Polaroid she had taken as a child, the pale-faced man with the erratic smile looking back at her from the paper. It confirmed her darkest fears. Longlegs, the man haunting her present, was the same man who had visited her so many years ago, on the eve of her 9th birthday. The revelation was a jolt. It was like being plunged into icy water. It connected all of the pieces, the childhood trauma, the murders, the coded letters, all to one terrifying figure from her past. She handed the photo over to the FBI, and they were able to make the arrest. But that was not the end. It was just the beginning of the nightmare. The missing date on the occult triangle, it was that day. Lee had a terrifying realization that an accomplice would commit the final murder to complete Longlegs' plan. They had him in custody, Longlegs, that pale-faced monster from her childhood. In the sterile environment of the interrogation room, he spoke in riddles and hints about serving the man downstairs. He mentioned Ruth, her mother, adding another terrifying dimension to the case. He knew about her family. He knew about her mother. He was the devil himself, disguised in human skin. He had been toying with her like a puppet master pulling the strings. He had a sick pleasure out of messing with her. Then, with a sudden, horrifying act, he killed himself. It was a move that seemed to say he was still in control, even in death. It left behind a sense of unease, a feeling that the worst was yet to come. As if that weren't enough, she was soon informed of Carrie's suicide. The realization washed over her. They were being manipulated. They were all just pieces of a larger, much more terrifying game. Agent Browning drove Lee to her mother's house, the air thick with foreboding. Lee arrived to witness her mother kill Browning with a shotgun, her eyes cold, her face emotionless. It was as if a switch had been flipped, revealing a side of Ruth that Lee had never known, a side of the monster she had hidden deep inside. Ruth then destroyed a doll resembling a young Lee, and Lee lost consciousness. The truth was far more disturbing than Lee could have ever imagined. Ruth had been Longlegs' accomplice since Lee's childhood, forced into complicity with his demonic plan. She did it to spare her daughter's life, and was under the thrall of Longlegs. Longlegs had lived in their basement, creating the satanic dolls, which Ruth, disguised as a nun, delivered to families. The dolls were a vehicle for possession and manipulation, turning fathers into cold-blooded killers. The whole world was turned upside down, everything she had believed to be true shattered. It was not a coincidence that she became an agent. Her doll blocked her memories of Longlegs, whilst influencing her with his magic. It was all a part of his design, a sick and twisted game to pull her deeper into the darkness. She was nothing more than a pawn in his twisted game. The revelation felt like a punch to the gut, painful and disorienting. Lee woke up in the basement, her head spinning, the smell of dust and decay thick in the air. The phone was ringing, the demonic voice on the other end warning her about William's daughter Ruby's 9th birthday party, the final act in Longlegs' dark ritual. She knew she had to act quickly. If the Carters died, Longlegs' plan would be complete. Lee rushed to the Carters' home, desperation fueling her actions. She found the family already possessed, with Ruth having delivered the cursed doll. William had already killed his wife Anna, and was consumed by a violent rage. The scene was chaotic. It was hell on earth. She could sense a sinister presence, something evil. She fought her own battles with herself, the fear and uncertainty, the dread that was engulfing her. Lee shot William to protect Ruby, and the realization came crashing in that her whole life had been one of the most complex traps. Ruth attacked Lee with a dagger, her face contorted with rage. Lee shot her mother, a final act of violence and sacrifice. The pain was unbearable. The grief and confusion was a physical agony. She tried to destroy the doll, but her gun would not fire. She had no more bullets, no more fight. She was exhausted. The evil doll stared back at her with its glassy eyes, and a horrible truth dawned on her. She was not alone in this, and she needed help. She looked at Ruby, and she knew what she had to do. They needed to get out. She took the little girl's hand, and they walked away into the night. They needed to go. They needed to survive this horror. The story doesn't end here. It is just the beginning, a first chapter in a horrifying tale. The doll lives on, and the darkness will always be there. It lurks, just out of sight, watching, waiting, and it will continue to haunt the people of this world.